is Alfried Laengle. I'm psychotherapist, physician, clinical psychologist, living in Vienna, having my practice here and teaching in different universities in the world, and leading the Society of Existential Analysis and Logotherapy, and not only teaching at universities, but also giving many seminars and also trainings in coaching. And I worked together with Vikor Frankl in Vienna for 10 years. And so now somehow trying to bring forward this existential perspective and the meaning perspective into life. And in context with the meaning perspective is the problem of burnout. People work very much nowadays. Burnout is a disorder which has been developed mostly after the 60s and 70s. Before it also was there, but the term didn't exist. But burnout is typical for our society. There are societies where burnout doesn't exist, but in our society, yes. And why? And we look at burnout through an existential perspective, which means that we look at how do people experience burnout, this situation, this suffering personally? How does this situation affect them? How do they perceive it and work it through and come to their reactions? And why don't they come out of it? And why does it even often become worse and worse, burnout? So that people, in severe burnout, people become suicidal because life is no longer worth to be lived. There is no energy, no joy, no happiness anymore. And why? And there is so much suffering at the same time. Why should they live? Existential perspective to people who are overworked and lose their zest of life, their joy, their relationship to themselves and to others. In burnout happens when people alienate from themselves, when they have to do things with which they cannot identify, in which they don't see themselves to be the right person, which doesn't really interest them, which is not resonating with them, which is distracting them, tearing them away from themselves, so that there is inattention when you have, for instance, a young family and that's because you bought an apartment or built a house, and you are in a profession with a good income, but more and more you dislike to do that. But there is no other professional possibility around which provides such an income, what you need for this situation in which you are. And then you go for years and do the same thing, and inwardly you already quit. You are not engaged. You are not really committed. You do not get fulfillment from what you do. You do not have an inner consent, an inner yes. You do not feel, yes, this is it. Here I can burn. Here I'm attached. This is moving me. This is so important. This is what I like to do. I'm glad nobody takes me away my job because it's really mine. And of course, when we work with engagement and especially with the inner consent and they can feel and sense, yes, for this I'm born. For this, this is important. For this, I can say yes. Maybe it's not the optimum. It's not the ideal, but it's still very good, and I experience a lot of values while doing it. When we have this, then we are protected against burnout. We can work a lot as long as we feel an inner yes to it, an inner yes which is open towards the outside and towards the inside, an inner yes where I sense it does good to me. It is something where I can move something to the better. And so this is rewarding. This is giving me back values. And then I feel inner fulfillment. And when I'm tired, I don't have consent to go on, because I sense and feel it's not good anymore for me. It would be good for making more money or whatever, but not for me. And therefore, I do not feel inner yes. Then I feel overloaded, I feel tired, I feel that I need something different. When I follow this sensitivity to values, then I'm protected against burnout. So in the existential perspective, we can say whoever does things with inner consent, and as long we feel inner consent, we have the best protection against burnout. But people who feel forced, who have to do that, or who are not capable to follow this inner sense and feeling, or are blocked in their feelings, or who are very ambitious, or who are under pressure, or who suffer from, let's say, a narcissism, also an inner pusher, then people do too much and exploit themselves. Burnout is, in most cases, a form of self-exploitation. I do more than I have the energy and the consent for, or I do things for which I do not have consent or energy. So if we have such a view on burnout, then we can say from an existential perspective, burnout is the healthiest what can happen to you or to me, because it prevents me to go on in a way which is damaging me, which leads me away from a fulfilling existence, which makes my life formal but having no content and no real value. And so burnout is a reaction of our psyche, which comes up. The psyche tells me, I stop you because you are not intelligent enough, or not capable enough, or not flexible enough to change the situation in which you are. And it is vital, it is existential what you do. You lose your life. You're functioning like a wheel in a machine, but you do not live your life, and you are not yourself. And therefore, it is so important to have a good understanding of burnout, and then, of course, of the reasons which lead to burnout. You know how burnout starts. Goes over several steps. It starts, people first at the beginning, sometimes they burn for what they do. And then they do more, they become ambitious, and they overstep boundaries, they work longer, too much, they neglect relationships, they neglect own needs, they neglect their pauses and weekends, and so they get in more and more, and then they become more and more tired. They reduce their life, which was rich before, to just the working perspective, and then they become physical disorders, sleeping disorders, intestine disorders, headaches, etc. Physical disorders happen often, and then they become aggressive towards others. They cannot bear any more social contact, and even, for instance, physicians, when they come into a burnout, they become naughty against their patients, which wasn't the case before. These are all already reactions to protect the person, to go on in the way how they do. Of course, this physician would need to make 3 weeks of holidays and to go for sports and to have leisure and to read a book and to enjoy family life, etc. And then this would equilibrate the situation. But when they don't do that, because they have nobody who replaces them, there can be external pressures, or if they are so ambitious to become the best doctor in their city, or to earn more money, or to just because out of a love of work they continue and lose their connection to their feelings, their love of work. It was at the beginning, but then it's no more there. All these situations lead to an overstepping of such boundaries and losing contact to the real values. And then the symptoms become worse. People become nausea when they think about their work, and finally they become depressive and even suicidal. And at the end, what we do in existential therapy with people in burnout, we work a lot on their attitudes towards their life. We help them, of course. First, it needs practical and medical issues to help them, and then relaxation and physical training and psychological training. But then we must find out the attitude behind their burnout, what led them to such a behavior, because people are not crazy, and burnout people are, until the very end, they are not depressive. There is a difference between depression and burnout. In burnout, people want to be active. They want to live. They want to do best. In some enterprises, you are a hero when you had a burnout, because it means you did whatever you could. You gave everything to the enterprise, and this is like becoming a working noble in the organization. Burnout people are active. Depressive people, they have a different ground. Their feeling of life is that life is not good. Their life is not good. They suffer because life is so heavy, as they are not motivated. It's not attractive. But for burnout people, they are ambitious and life is attractive, and they want to live until the very end. But at the very end of a burnout development, this leads into depression also, and also suicidality. But for the whole development, there's a big difference between burnout and depression. It's also good to know, because burnout people in principle are not sick. They are over-demanded, be it by outer demands, be it by inner demands, and they do not or cannot keep the boundaries, draw boundaries, live within the natural human boundaries which are given, and which is a challenge to live with our boundaries, and at the same time to fulfill the values to the best and get satisfaction and full inner fulfillment out of it. This is the perspective we look at burnout from the existential side. From that side, which is existential, means it is based on decisions. We find out which decisions, which attitudes, which positions people have, and which are healthy, and which positions and attitudes over-demanding them and need to be corrected. This has often to do with biographical background, for instance, the fear to fall back into poverty in which they grew up. And this can stimulate people, and they can become very effective and very successful and end in burnout, because this experience of the childhood hasn't been resolved. And burnout tells them, resolve this first. Now it's time. Now you are not in danger. When you have resolved it, you can come to a very productive and rewarding work.